Its silence was a judgment. Commander Ava Rostova felt it in the bone-deep vibration of her command chair, a frequency too low to hear, but too persistent to ignore. It thrummed through the deck plates of the Coalition patrol ship, Vigilance, a ghost note in the symphony of the vessel's life support. Before her, the main bridge viewport was filled with the breathtaking desolation of the Ashen Crown, a shattered ring world hanging like a broken halo around a dying star. But it was not the ruins that held every soul on the bridge captive. It was the object they framed, a sliver of impossible geometry, a vessel that absorbed the faint starlight without reflection. Its sensor profile was a lie. It was there, a mass of several million tons, yet the ship's systems struggled to define its edges. They flickered between crystalline solid and folded space-time, a paradox given form. Ancient records fragmented, and half-myth called it the Argent Ledger. It was a relic from humanity's long-lost golden age of expansion, a time when their reach was absolute and their creations defied known physics. Now it drifted inert and silent, its sleeping arrays the subject of 1,000 desperate legends. The stakes were simple. The Vigilance was here to claim it, for the Coalition to preserve a piece of history. But they were not alone. Another fleet scavengers with a gilded sense of entitlement were closing fast. Report Rostova said, her voice a low counterpoint to the ship's hum. Her executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Jian Li, stepped forward, his face illuminated by the cool blue light of a holotank. The Gilded Hand Flotilla has translated from FTL Commander. 3 light minutes out and burning hard. They're launching interceptors. Nomos projects they will reach the relic 87 minutes before we can establish a secure perimeter. Rostova's gaze remained fixed on the impossible ship. It was less a machine and more a monument to a forgotten faith. A faith built on numbers and truth. She felt a strange, illogical reverence for it, a feeling the ship's AI Nomos would have flagged as a tactical liability. The relic's sigil, a stylized abacus with a single unblinking point of light at its center, was already a legend taught to schoolchildren. Seeing it now etched into the silent hull felt like staring at the face of a sleeping god. Her orders were to secure it. Her instincts screamed that you did not secure a storm. You learned to weather it. Dr. Eris Thorne, the mission's resident xeno-archivist and historian, leaned over his own console, his eyes wide with a manic glee. Commander, its energy readings are null, but the gravimetric distortions are elegant. It isn't fighting the system's gravity, it's agreeing with it, harmonizing. It's not just dormant, it's in a state of perfect equilibrium. Can we wake it up? Aris Rostova asked, cutting to the core of the problem. The legends say it doesn't answer to a command, but to a plea, Thorne murmured almost to himself. It is not a warship. The texts refer to it as a saint ship, an arbiter, a keeper of covenants, a civilian freighter captain, his face a patchwork of anxiety and desperation, watched from a small transport docked at a nearby asteroid mining outpost. He had hailed the Vigilance hours earlier, his voice trembling as he reported the Gilded Hand's approach. They were not known for their mercy. He and his small community of prospectors were caught between a force of nature and a fleet of vultures praying the Coalition patrol ship was enough. He gripped a small, worn data slate containing the deed to his claim, a legal document that felt impossibly fragile in the face of incoming warships. The Gilded Hand did not bother with pleasantries. Their comms channel crackled to life, broadcasting a system-wide ultimatum. Coalition vessel Vigilance, a smooth, arrogant voice declared, "This is Lord Captain Kalen Vore of the reclamation vessel Golden Mean. The artifact in this system is the legal salvage of the Hand. Withdraw or be fired upon. Our claim is absolute." Rostova's knuckles turned white on the armrest of her chair. Vor's definition of salvage was closer to tomb robbing on a galactic scale. They were thieves dressed in the language of law. Nomos options, she stated flatly. The AI's synthesized voice, devoid of any emotion, filled the quiet bridge. Option 1, engage the Gilded Hand. Probability of mission success, 31.2%. Probability of vigilance sustaining critical damage, 88.9%. Option 2, withdraw and observe. Preserve coalition assets. Probability of relic acquisition by hostile forces, 100%. Jian Li shifted his weight. Commander protocol dictates we do not engage a superior force without clear strategic advantage. We are outgunned 3-1. Protocol doesn't account for this. Rostova countered, gesturing to the silent ship on the screen. That isn't just a weapon, Jian. It's our history. It's the proof of what we once were. She opened a channel. Lord Captain Vor, this is Commander Rostova of the Vigilance. This artifact is a declared heritage site under Coalition Mandate 7 Alpha. It is not salvage. Power down your weapon systems and prepare to be boarded for inspection. It was a bluff, but a necessary one. The laughter that came back was rich with contempt. Mandates, your little government's rules do not extend to the graveyards of God's commander. You have 5 minutes to depart. The channel went dead. On the tactical display, the Gilded Hand's ships began to change formation, their movements sharp and predatory. They were preparing to box the Vigilance in using their numbers to cut off any escape. Rostova felt the trap closing. They couldn't fight, and they couldn't run. Their only hope lay in the silent enigma before them. Eris, tell me how to wake it up. Now. Thorn scrambled to bring up ancient texts on his console, fractured translations of a dead human dialect. It speaks in a language of pure logic, of cause and effect. The archives call it a process of petition. We must present it with a case, a formal appeal for intervention based on an existing covenant. We have to prove a wrong is being committed, a debt that must be collected. A covenant. Jian asked, his skepticism plain. We don't have any covenant with a ship that's been silent for 10,000 years. We do, Rostova said, a sudden fierce clarity cutting through her thoughts. She turned to her communications officer. Get me the civilian leader of the Ashen Crown Prospectors. Patch him through to my command console, and open a direct data stream to the relic. Use a diplomatic cipher, highest priority. She looked at Thorn. Aris, I need you to help me draft a legal petition. We are about to sue the Gilded Hand in the court of a sleeping god. The Gilded Hand fleet surged forward, their engines flaring like angry wasps. Their lead cruiser, the Golden Mean, fired a warning shot, a lance of searing plasma that vaporized a nearby asteroid. The message was clear, time was up. Aboard, the vigilance alarms blared as the ship was rocked by the electromagnetic pulse. The lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the bridge. Rostova ignored them, her focus absolute. The prospector's face appeared on her screen, pale and terrified. Commander, what's happening? I'm offering you the protection of the Coalition. Rostova said, her voice steady and reassuring. I need you to transmit a formal request for aid. Acknowledge the Gilded Hand as a hostile force threatening your claim, your life and your liberty under established Coalition law. We will witness and co-sign it. The universe remembers a promise witnessed. You want me to file paperwork now? The man asked, his voice cracking with disbelief. Yes, Rostova insisted. It's the most important paperwork you will ever file. To her crew, she ordered Nomos package the prospector's plea with all sensor logs of the Hand's aggression. Include Vor's illegal salvage claim and our formal warning. Frame it all within the legal structure of Coalition Mandate 7 Alpha. Title the data packet Petition for Adjudication. Nomos processed the command, its internal chronometers ticking away the seconds. Packet compiled. The relic's outer systems show no conventional data ports. The chance of this transmission being received or understood is statistically indistinguishable from zero. Send it anyway, Rostova commanded. All frequencies, full power. A beacon of law in a void of chaos. The Gilded Hand began their final approach. Their smaller ships peeled off, moving to engage the Vigilance directly, while the larger vessels focused their attention on the silent relic. Tractor beams, powerful enough to shift moons, latched onto its crystalline hull. They pulled engines, straining, trying to drag their prize away. But the Argent Ledger did not move. It did not even shudder. It simply continued to exist, its perfect equilibrium an insult to the brute force being applied. Then their cutting lasers fired beams of concentrated energy designed to slice through battleship armor. The light struck the hull and vanished without a trace, not reflected, not absorbed, but simply nullified. On the bridge of the Vigilance, Thorn gasped. It's not resisting them, it's ignoring them. Their actions are outside its logical framework. They have no standing. Suddenly, a single point of light appeared on the Vigilance's main view screen, emanating from the relic. It was the sigil of the abacus, glowing with a soft, silver light. A low chime, clear as a bell, echoed through the bridge, not from the speakers, but seemingly inside every crew member's skull. A data stream, impossibly clean and perfectly structured, opened directly with their ship's AI. Nomos's synthesized voice spoke for the first time with a faint trace of something akin to surprise. Receiving transmission from the artifact. It is a query. What does it want? Rostova asked, leaning forward, her heart pounding. It is asking for clarification, Nomos replied. It has acknowledged our petition. It is asking for the title of the presiding legal authority. A test. A question of worthiness. Rostova took a breath. She looked at the terrified face of the prospector on her screen, at the determined faces of her crew, and at the predatory ships of the Gilded Hand preparing to fire. She was just a commander of a single patrol ship, a tiny cog in the vast machinery of the Coalition. But here now, in this forgotten place, she was the only voice for the law. Tell it. Tell it, the authority is Commander Eva Rostova, acting under the full weight of the Terran Coalition Accord, she said, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. Tell it, we are the inheritors of the Covenant. We are the promise made real. The silver light of the sigil on the Argent Ledger's hull pulsed once warmly. Aboard the Gilded Hand's flagship, Lord Captain Vor watched his instruments with growing fury. The relic was supposed to be a dead thing, a treasure to be taken. Instead, it was communicating with the pathetic Coalition ship. He would not be denied. All ships, he snarled into the calm, full barrage. Target the relic's primary structure. If we cannot have it whole, we will take it in pieces. A storm of plasma torpedoes and kinetic slugs erupted from his fleet. It was a wave of pure destructive force, enough to shatter a small planet. It washed over the Argent Ledger, a silent, incandescent tide. And for a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Inside a cramped hydroponics bay on the Prospector outpost, a young girl looked up from tending a row of leafy greens. She saw the flash of the Gilded Hand's weapons through the thick plasteel window. Her father had told her the Coalition ship would protect them, but it was so small and the other ships were so big. She squeezed her eyes shut, clutching a small, smooth stone she had found in the asteroid belt, a tiny piece of the system that felt like home. She wished for the fire to go away. The fire did not vanish. It was recorded. On the bridge of the Vigilance, the crew watched in stunned silence. The Argent Ledger's hull did not shield or defend. Instead, every impact, every joule of energy, every kinetic strike was met with a flicker of silver light. It was as if the ship were taking notes, meticulously cataloging the assault against it. A ledger of sins was being tallied with perfect accuracy. The debt was being calculated. What is it doing? Gian breathed, his by-the-book composure finally cracking. It's not fighting, Thorn whispered, his face a mask of awe. It's adjudicating. Then, as the Gilded Hand's final volley struck home, the Argent Ledger acted. Its hull remained pristine, untouched, but the silver light of its sigil flared, becoming an incandescent white that outshone the dying star at the system's heart. There was no explosion, no counter-battery fire. There was only a perfect, instantaneous reversal. Every joule of energy Vor's fleet had expended was returned to them along the exact same vectors at the exact same moment. The plasma torpedoes that had hit the relic were reborn, launching from its hull and streaking back towards the ships that had fired them. The kinetic slugs reappeared, traveling in reverse, their momentum perfectly conserved. The flagship's massive spinal cannon had fired a beam of coherent energy a moment before. Now an identical beam erupted from the Argent Ledger, a perfect mirror image, and slammed into the Golden Mean. It was not an attack. It was a refund, a violence repaid in full. The Gilded Hand fleet was thrown into chaos. Shields overloaded, armor buckled, and engines sputtered and died as their own weapons became their undoing. The Golden Mean's primary power conduit ruptured, sending a cascade of explosions ripping through its spine. The ship didn't just die. It was neatly surgically disabled by its own hubris. Kalen. Vor screamed in fury and disbelief as his bridge turned into a maelstrom of fire and shrieking metal. Aboard the Vigilance, the only sound was the soft hum of the life support. Rostova slowly rose from her chair, her eyes locked on the Argent Ledger. The ancient saint ship now glowed with a gentle internal silver light. It was awake, and it had chosen a side. Not her side, she realized. It had chosen the side of the law. Nomos, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Status of the Gilded Hand fleet. Multiple vessels critically damaged, the AI reported. Widespread system failures. They are withdrawing, or attempting to. Their FTL drives are offline, consistent with damage from their own unique energy signatures. Nomos paused, a programmed delay for dramatic effect. The hostile fleet has been neutralized by an application of its own kinetic and thermal energy. A perfect closed-loop equation. The balance sheet had been cleared. Rostova looked at the civilian prospector on her screen. The man was staring speechless, tears streaming down his face. The little girl in the hydroponics bay had opened her eyes. The fire was gone. In its place was a beautiful silver star that seemed to watch over them. Rostova knew this was only the beginning. She had awoken a power that the galaxy was not ready for. A power that did not conquer but judged. A power that taught by numbers and remembered by ledgers, not by collars or chains. Her ship had suffered minor damage in the initial crossfire, a few scorched plates and a strained power coupling, but they were alive. They were witnesses. It was a burden and an honor in equal measure. She took a deep breath, the sterile recycled air of the bridge feeling suddenly fresh and new. Gian, send a message to the prospector colony. Tell them they are safe. Thorn. I want every scrap of data you can find on this ship, on its history, on its purpose. Nomos, open a permanent secure channel to the Argent Ledger. Let's see what other covenants it remembers. The silver light of the relic pulsed gently, a slow, steady heartbeat in the dark. It was waiting. for the next petition, for the next wrong to be made right. Rostova had become its steward, the keeper of a key she was only just beginning to understand. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders, heavier than any armor, more binding than any oath. She had asked for a miracle and received a mandate. The age of myth was over. The age of reckoning had just begun. The remaining ships of the Gilded Hand, crippled and bleeding atmosphere, began to limp away, their retreat a ragged, shameful affair. Vor's crippled flagship, the Golden Mean, was a wreck, its spine broken, its gilded plating scorched black. But they were not pursued. The Argent Ledger simply watched them go, its silver glow, a silent testament to the judgment that had been passed. There was no malice in its actions, no anger. There was only the cold, clear logic of a balanced equation. A crime recorded, a penalty exacted. Commander Jian Li said, his voice now laced with a reverence that bordered on fear. "What are our orders?" Rostova turned away from the viewport, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her bridge crew. They looked at her with a new kind of respect, a sense of awe. She was no longer just their commander. She was the woman who had spoken to a legend and received an answer. "Our orders are to uphold the law, Lieutenant Commander, and our new partner seems to be an expert in that field. Let's start with a basic salvage and aid claim. Send rescue teams to the disabled hand vessels. Their crews are now prisoners of war under coalition law." This was the next test. Vor had acted with lawless aggression. Rostova would respond with due process. It was a message to the watching relic, a demonstration that she understood the nature of the power she had invoked. They would build a precedent of mercy upon a verdict of justice. Nomos, ever the pragmatist, interjected. "Commander, my analysis indicates the Argent Ledger is drawing a negligible amount of power from the system's primary star to maintain its awakened state. Its energy consumption is sustainable, efficient. However, the political ramifications of this event will be severe. The coalition Senate will be in uproar. Other factions will see this as a threat or a prize. Let them," Rostova said calmly. "They'll learn soon enough that it is neither. It's a mirror. It only shows you what you bring to it." She knew the bureaucratic battles ahead would be as fierce as any space combat. There would be admirals who wanted to control the relic, scientists who wanted to dismantle it, and enemies who wanted to destroy it. She would have to stand against them all. "Doctor." Thorne approached her, his console slate clutched in his hand like a holy text. "Commander, the initial data stream from the ledger. It's not just a communications link. It's a library. A record of every legal code, every treaty, every covenant humanity has ever made, stretching back to the dawn of civilization. It's the ultimate legal archive." His voice trembled with the scale of his discovery. "It doesn't just enforce the law. It remembers it." The scope of it was staggering. It was not a weapon of mass destruction. It was a weapon of mass jurisprudence. It could potentially end wars before they began by simply showing the aggressor the inevitable cost. The universe kept a perfect accounting. On the crippled bridge of the Golden Mean, Kalen Vor managed to pull himself from the wreckage. His fine clothes were torn and burned, his face smeared with soot. He stared at the silver ship on his failing view screen, his arrogance shattered and replaced by a burning, hateful obsession. He had not been defeated by a superior fleet. He had been humiliated by a principle. He had lost a fortune in ships and reputation. But he had gained a new purpose to understand and then corrupt the power of the Argent Ledger. He would find a loophole in its perfect logic. He would teach the machine how to lie. Rostova, sensing the long path stretching out before her, felt a weariness settle deep in her bones. But it was a good weariness, the fatigue of a job well done, of a crisis averted. She had placed her faith in an idea, the idea that the law was not just a set of rules, but a fundamental force of the universe. And she had been proven right. She had looked into the abyss, and a legacy of order had looked back. A legacy that now carried her name. A young ensign, her face flushed with excitement, spoke up from the sensor station. "Commander, I'm picking up multiple FTL translations. High-energy signatures. They're coalition markings, ma'am. Battle Group Sigma. They're responding to our distress call." Jian Li straightened up, a look of relief on his face. The cavalry has arrived. Rostova, however, felt a new knot of tension form in her stomach. The battle with the Gilded Hand might be over, but her struggle was just beginning. The cavalry would bring with it admirals, politicians, and bureaucrats. They would bring their own agendas, their own ambitions. She now had to protect the Argent Ledger, not just from its enemies, but from its so-called friends. She had to become its advocate, its guardian. "Keep the channel to the ledger open, Nomos," she ordered, "and record everything. Every order I give, every communication we receive. From now on, everything is on the record." She looked back at the glowing Saint ship, a silent partner in the great work ahead. The universe was watching, and the ledger was taking notes. The first entry had been made. The first ships of Battle Group Sigma arrived, sleek gray predators of military efficiency. They were led by the heavy cruiser Indomitable, the flagship of Admiral Kozlov, a man known for his rigid adherence to protocol and his deep suspicion of anything that fell outside of established norms. His first communication was not one of relief, but of stern inquiry. "Commander Rostova," his voice boomed across the Vigilance's bridge, clipped and severe. "Report your status. Explain the energy readings that triggered a fleet-wide alert. And clarify why my tactical display shows you in possession of an unauthorized and unidentified naval asset." Rostova stood tall. This was the first test of her new stewardship. "Admiral Kozlov, this is Commander Rostova. The Vigilance is fully operational. We have successfully defended a civilian outpost from aggressors and secured a heritage artifact of immense significance. The unidentified asset is the CNS Argent Ledger, an ancestral saint ship now under my provisional authority. A careful choice of words, asserting control without claiming ownership." There was a long pause. Rostova could almost hear the gears turning in Kozlov's mind, the clash of protocol with an unbelievable reality. "Provisional authority, Commander. You are a patrol ship captain. You do not have the clearance to command an ancestral asset. You will transfer all data and tactical control to my flagship immediately. That is an order." Here it was. The first challenge. Not from a pirate, but from her own chain of command. She knew if she surrendered control, the ledger would fall silent again, or worse, become a pawn in a political game its true purpose lost. She had been the one to petition it to awaken it by pleading a case of law. Her standing was unique. "With respect," Admiral Rostova replied, her voice unwavering. "I cannot comply. My connection to the ledger is based on a legal petition it has already adjudicated. It does not respond to a transfer of command. It responds to the principle of lawful stewardship. Are you refusing a direct order?" Commander Kozlov's voice was dangerously low. "I am advising my superior officer of a tactical reality he cannot yet appreciate from his vantage point," Rostova countered, choosing her words with the precision of a surgeon. "The Argent Ledger is not a ship you command, Admiral. It is a court you petition." This was the new doctrine written in fire and light. Before Kozlov could respond, Nomos spoke. Admiral Koslov, the Argent Ledger, has just cross-referenced your vessel's registry with its internal archives. It finds your ship, the Indomitable, to be in violation of the Tylos Accords, Pama. Section 4, subsection Beta, regarding mandatory engine maintenance cycles. It notes your particle emitters are 3.7% out of alignment. The bridge of the Vigilance fell silent. Jian Li's eyes were wide as dinner plates. Thorne was trying and failing to suppress a grin. The ancient ship was auditing the Admiral. Kozlov's response was a strangled sound of incoherent rage. "That is classified. How could it possibly?" "The Ledger's archives appear to be comprehensive," Admiral Rostova said, a hint of steel in her tone. "It is a keeper of all records. I suggest we table the discussion of command authority until we can brief you properly. My crew is already preparing rescue and processing teams for the Gilded Hand survivors." She had turned the tables using the relic's own nature as a shield. She had established a new rule of engagement to deal with the Ledger. You had to be prepared for your own record to be scrutinized. It was a terrifying and brilliant defense. The law was a shield for those who upheld it. Admiral Kozlov, for the first time in his storied career, was speechless. He was a man of rules, and a machine that knew all the rules, including the ones he had bent, had just called him out. He cut the channel without another word. The ships of Battle Group Sigma maintained their position, a silent, powerful audience to the unfolding drama. Aboard the primary prospector habitat, the community was celebrating. The captain, who had made the desperate call, raised a glass of synthesized spirit. To the Vigilance, he toasted, his voice thick with emotion. And to Commander Rostova, she didn't just save our lives. She reminded us that the law is more than just words on a slate. It has a soul. Around him, the miners' engineers and their families cheered their fears, forgotten, in a wave of profound relief and gratitude. Their small, insignificant lives had become the basis for a galactic precedent. Rostova allowed herself a small, tired smile as she watched the rescue operations begin. The Vigilance, small and slightly battered, looked almost insignificant next to the massive cruisers of the battle group. But it was the heart of the operation, the vital link to the silent, glowing arbiter that had changed everything. She had not sought this power, this responsibility, but she would not shy away from it. "Nomos," she said quietly, "begin a new file, a log. Title it, The First Precedent. We need to document every single thing that happens from this moment forward. The galaxy is going to need a user's manual for justice." The Argent Ledger seemed to brighten in response, its silver light, a steady, reassuring presence in the void. It had slept for millennia, waiting for a voice that spoke its language. It had found one in a simple patrol ship commander who believed in the promise of the law. A promise that would now echo across the stars. The ledger was open, the first account had been settled, and a new chapter in human history was about to be written. The age of reckoning had truly begun. The days that followed were a maelstrom of calculated diplomacy and quiet tension. Admiral Koslov, after a lengthy and heated private discussion with his own legal counsel, and presumably his chief engineer, adopted a posture of wary cooperation. He did not challenge Rostova's authority over the ledger again, but his battle group formed a tight, suffocating perimeter around the Ashen Crown system. It was a quarantine disguised as a protective cordon. News of the event was locked down under the highest security protocols, but information like radiation always leaks. Whispers began to spread through encrypted naval channels. A ghost ship from the Golden Age had awakened. Rostova's life became a series of conferences and reports. She spent hours in conversation with Nomos and Aris Thorne, trying to understand the full capabilities and, more importantly, the limitations of the Argent Ledger. They discovered it was not omniscient. It could only act upon data it was given, or could directly observe. Its vast library of laws was a tool, not a conscience. It required a petitioner, a living agent, to bring a case before it. It was a symbiotic relationship. The ship was the scales of justice, but she had to be the hand that held them. During one long analysis session, Thorne made a critical discovery. It's in the source code of its operating system, if you can call it that. He explained, his fingers flying across a holographic interface. There are core tenets, unbreakable principles. The first is the tally is absolute. It means the facts of a case, the raw data, cannot be disputed. The second is the debt must be honored. That's the adjudication we saw. The third is the most important, no judgment without petition. It cannot act on its own. It is forbidden from becoming a tyrant. This was the key. The safety protocol that had been built into its very soul. It was a tool, not a ruler. It could not initiate conflict. It could only respond to it. The architects of the past had been wise, creating a power so immense it had to be chained to the will of a mortal, forcing them to bear the moral weight of its use. It was a perfect burden. The Gilded Hand prisoners were processed, their testimony meticulously recorded. Under questioning, they revealed the scope of Kalen Vor's obsession. He had spent a decade and a vast fortune hunting for the Argent Ledger, believing it to be the ultimate weapon, a key to overthrowing the coalition and establishing his own empire. He had not understood its true nature. Now his remaining followers, scattered and leaderless, were a new kind of threat. They were no longer just looters. They were the first heretics of a new technological faith twisted by their leaders' greed. A vignette of this new reality played out on a distant, lawless moon. A former lieutenant of the Gilded Hand, a woman named Syra, gathered a handful of survivors in a grimy cantina. "For what's wrong?" she told them, her voice a low, fanatic hiss. He tried to command it. But the power isn't in commanding. It's in petitioning. The coalition commander showed us the way. If her case for justice could awaken it, imagine what a case for vengeance could do. She held up a data slate displaying the sigil of the abacus. We will learn the new scripture. We will find a wrong, so great a debt so vast, that when we plead our case, the ledger will grant us a judgment that will burn the galaxy to cinder. A new cult was born in the ashes of defeat. Rostova felt the ripples of her actions spreading. The responsibility weighed on her, a physical pressure behind her eyes. She slept little, her dreams filled with glowing sigils and endless columns of numbers. She found solace only on the bridge of the vigilance, in the quiet, steady presence of the silver ship that filled her viewport. It felt less like a machine and more like a partner, a silent mentor. It demanded precision, clarity, and truth. In return, it offered a terrible, beautiful certainty. The political situation escalated. The two other major human factions, the corporate city-states of the Jupiter hegemony and the isolationist Martian Commonwealth, learned of the ledger's existence through their own intelligence networks. They saw it not as a legal tool, but as a strategic asset that had tipped the balance of power. They sent diplomatic envoys, their ships bristling with barely concealed weapons demanding access to the artifact. The Ashen Crown system became the new focal point of galactic tension. A Cold War began to form around a relic of law. Admiral Kozlov, now forced into the role of a reluctant gatekeeper, was caught between his orders from the Coalition High Command and the increasingly volatile reality on the ground. He and Rostova formed an uneasy alliance, two officers of starkly different temperaments, bound by a shared, unprecedented crisis. He handled the military posturing, the fleet movements, the shows of force. She handled the relic. The hegemony ambassador is demanding a formal audience, Kozlov informed her during one of their tense daily briefings. He claims their corporate charters grant them a historical claim to any technology developed during the Golden Age. He's threatening sanctions. His claim is baseless, Rostova replied coolly, having already consulted with Thorne and the Ledger's archives. The charters he cites were superseded by the Terran Accord 3 centuries ago. The Ledger itself was a signatory to that accord in a manner of speaking. Its creators bound it to the legal framework that would eventually become the Coalition. She paused. Tell the ambassador I will meet with him, but the meeting will take place in neutral territory aboard the civilian prospector station, and all parties will consent to have their statements recorded and witnessed by the Ledger. A subtle invitation and a deadly threat. The meeting was a masterpiece of political theater. The hegemony ambassador, a slick, impeccably dressed man named Valerius, arrived with a retinue of lawyers, their data slates loaded with convoluted arguments. Rostova met him with only Dr. Thorne at her side. The meeting room was plain, its only decoration, a viewport looking out at the distant glowing form of the Argent Ledger. Its presence was felt by everyone in the room, a silent, incorruptible observer. Valerius began with a long, rambling speech about corporate heritage, historical rights, and the spirit of innovation. He presented his case with eloquent confidence. When he finished, he smiled, certain of his victory. Rostova did not offer a counter-argument. She simply said, Nomos, please present the relevant sections of the Terran Accord witnessed and ratified by the planetary governments of Earth-Mars and the Jovian colonies, including the corporate entities represented by the ambassador's own ancestors. A holographic display shimmered into existence between them. It showed the ancient document, the digital signatures still clear and bright. It showed the clauses that explicitly ceded all claims on ancestral military and judicial assets to a unified governing body. It showed the very corporate charters Valerius had cited with footnotes indicating where they had been legally nullified. The past had a voice, and it spoke in perfect clarity. The ambassador's face went pale. His lawyers began to whisper furiously among themselves, their arguments dissolving in the face of incontrovertible proof. He had come to debate, but he was faced with a fact. The Ledger had not uttered a word, but it had won the argument. Valerius and his delegation left with their legal tails between their legs. The hegemony's official claim was withdrawn the next day. Rostova had won another victory, but it felt hollow. She had not convinced an opponent. She had crushed him with the dead weight of history. She was beginning to see the danger of her new power. It was absolute, and absolute things were brittle. They did not bend. They only broke those who pushed against them. She confided her fears to Jian Li one evening on the quiet bridge. We won today, Jian, she said, staring out at the stars. But it felt ruthless. We didn't leave him any room to negotiate to save face. He was in the wrong. Commander Jian replied, ever the pragmatist. The law is the law. That's what the Ledger represents. But is that all there is, Rostova mused. Justice without compassion is just another form of tyranny. We need to be careful that in wielding this power we don't become as inflexible as it is. A new question arose, not how to use the power, but how to temper it. Her words were prophetic. A new crisis was brewing, one that a simple legal precedent could not solve. Kalen Vor, having escaped the Ashen Crown in a small, fast shuttle, had made his way to the lawless Outer Rim. There he used his remaining fortune and his considerable charisma to rally a new fleet not of scavengers, but of true believers. He preached a new gospel painting the Coalition as a tyrannical power that sought to hoard the Ledger's divine justice for itself. He promised his followers that he would find a way to make the saint ship serve the common man, the outcast, the forgotten. His first act was not one of piracy, but a twisted act of what he called lawful justice. His new fleet blockaded the independent colony world of Meridian, a major trade hub that had recently and contentiously signed a treaty with the coalition. Vor's fleet did not fire a shot. Instead, they broadcast a message to the system and to the Argent Ledger. "We, the free people of the Rim, petition the Great Arbiter." Vor's voice, now filled with the fervor of a prophet, announced. "The colony of Meridian has entered into an illegal treaty with the Terran Coalition, a treaty signed under economic duress. This violates their planetary charter of independence. We present evidence of this coercion. We ask the Ledger to nullify this treaty and declare Meridian a free state. We are not aggressors. We are petitioners, just as Commander Rostova was." Rostova felt a chill run down her spine. Vor had been clever. He had found his loophole. He was not attacking. He was filing a lawsuit using a fleet of warships as his legal team. He was using her own methods against her. He was forcing the Ledger to choose a side in a political dispute. The situation was a nightmare. If the Ledger agreed with Vor, it would shatter the coalition's political authority. If it did nothing, it would prove itself to be nothing more than a coalition weapon, destroying the very idea of its impartiality. Vor had trapped them in a web of perfect logic. The only way out was to prove his case was a lie. But the Meridian Treaty, it had been contentious. There were whispers that the coalition had in fact strong-armed the colony into signing. The tally, the absolute facts of the case might just be on Vor's side. The universe was about to weigh a promise against a sin, and Rostova was no longer sure which side she was on. The bridge of the vigilance became a silent, pressurized chamber of impending doom. Kalen Vor's petition was a masterstroke of malicious litigation, a declaration of war disguised as a legal proceeding. He had weaponized the very principles Rostova had fought to uphold. On the main view screen, the ships of his Liberation Fleet held their position, a perfect menacing cordon around the planet Meridian. They were pristine, their engines burning with a cold, steady light, a stark contrast to the scorched and battered vessels of the Gilded Hand. These were not scavengers. They were disciples. "He's using the Ledger's own logic as a cage." Aristhorn murmured his usual academic excitement, replaced by a grim fascination. "He's not claiming salvage or territory. He's claiming moral and legal high ground. The data he's presenting, Commander, some of it is authentic. The trade negotiations for the Meridian Treaty were aggressive. Our negotiators leveraged their debt and their need for defense pacts." Rostova stared at the tactical display, the cold geometry of the blockade. Vor wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to prove a point. That law was a tool for the powerful, and he could be more powerful, more clever in his use of it. A deceit wrapped in the shroud of truth. Admiral Koslov's face appeared on her command console, his expression a thunderous mask. "Commander, this farce has gone on long enough. Vor is a known pirate and insurrectionist. High Command has authorized me to engage and destroy his fleet. We will not allow a terrorist to dictate terms to the coalition. And what happens when your first volley proves his point?" Admiral Rostova countered, her voice dangerously calm. "Vor has petitioned the Ledger. He is claiming we are the aggressors, the bullies. If you open fire, you validate his entire case. The Ledger will see it as the coalition silencing a petitioner with violence. How do you think it will rule then? It is a machine, Rostova, a fancy calculator. It doesn't understand politics or context. It understands cause and effect better than any living thing in this galaxy," she shot back. "It will see your attack as a new debt being incurred. One it will be obliged to settle." This was the precipice. One wrong move and they would become the villains in their own story. The law, unbending, would break them. Koslov gritted his teeth, the muscles in his jaw flexing. He knew she was right. His warships were useless, held in check not by enemy guns, but by an idea. What do you propose, Commander? We sit here and allow him to steal a planet with a well-worded argument, no. Rostova said, a new resolve hardening in her voice. We don't argue his case. We investigate his standing. The ledger honors the petition, but it must also judge the petitioner. Vor's argument is that he is acting on behalf of the people of Meridian. We need to find out if the people of Meridian agree. It was a gambit, a long shot. It meant going beyond the cold, hard data of treaties and into the messy, complicated world of public sentiment. It meant proving a negative, showing the court that the plaintiff had no legitimate claim to represent the victim. Nomos Rostova commanded, begin a deep data dive. I want every piece of communication coming out of Meridian for the past year. Encrypted back channels, commercial traffic, personal logs. Cross-reference it with Vor's known associates. Aris, get me a complete psychological and historical profile on Vor. I want to know how he thinks. She was no longer just a commander. She was an attorney for the prosecution, building a case against a man who had put the entire coalition on trial. Her battlefield was the truth. On Meridian, in a bustling spaceport city now under the silent siege of Vor's fleet, a shipping foreman named Kale watched the news with his family. The official coalition reports were clipped and reassuring. Vor's broadcasts were seductive, promising freedom from corporate debt and true independence. His teenage son was captivated. He's right, you know, the boy said. The coalition treaty forced Dad's company to lay off half its workers. We're not partners, we're subjects. Kyle looked at the ships in the sky, then at the worry on his wife's face. He felt trapped, not between two fleets, but between two futures, neither of which felt like his own. The investigation was a slow, agonizing grind. For 2 days, the crews of the Vigilance and the Indomitable worked in shifts, sifting through mountains of data. The initial findings were not promising. There was widespread discontent on Meridian regarding the treaty. Vor's agents had been active for months, stoking resentment and promising a populist uprising. His legal case from the perspective of a purely logical machine was growing stronger. The pressure from high command was immense. Koslov was fending off hourly demands to break the stalemate by force. Rostova found herself in a quiet, undeclared war against her own side. She was defending not just the law, but a specific interpretation of it, one that valued truth over expediency. It was a lonely position. During a brief moment of rest, Jan Lee found her staring at the argent ledger, its silver light a constant silent presence. We are running out of time, Ava, he said, using her first name for the first time since the academy. The politicians are getting scared. They are starting to talk about acceptable losses, about sacrificing Meridian to prevent Vor from gaining control of the ledger. That's not justice, she said softly. It's fear. They are afraid of being judged. The ledger doesn't frighten me anymore, Gian. It simplifies things. There's no spin, no agenda. There is only the tally. A perfect truth in a galaxy of lies. It was Nomos who found the first crack in Vor's perfect facade. The AI's voice was as always flat, but the information it presented was explosive. Commander, I have isolated a pattern of encrypted financial transactions. Kalen Vor has been systematically acquiring the devalued debt of the Meridian colony through a series of shell corporations. If the coalition treaty is nullified, the colony's economy will collapse. He will be positioned to become their sole creditor. He is not liberating them. He is planning a hostile takeover. There it was. The lie at the heart of the petition. Eris Thorne, cross-referencing the financial data with his historical research, added the final piece. It's his classic pattern. He did the same thing on 3 systems in the Outer Rim. He foments a rebellion, crashes the economy, and then seizes the key infrastructure as payment for his assistance. He's not a pirate who steals cargo. He's a predator who steals worlds. The tally was becoming clear. Vor's petition was a fraud, a legal instrument being used to perpetrate the very crime it claimed to be fighting coercion. Rostova felt a surge of cold, righteous anger. Vor had perverted the sanctity of the court. He had lied to the face of a god. But the evidence was circumstantial. It was a projection of future events of intent. The ledger dealt in facts and actions already taken. They needed something more. They needed proof that Vor's petition was not supported by the people he claimed to represent. They needed a voice from Meridian. That was when Vor made his second mistake. He grew impatient. To force the ledger's hand, he escalated the blockade. Citing the pending litigation, his ships began to seize incoming freighters carrying medical supplies and atmospheric processors for the colony. It was a cruel, calculated move designed to create a humanitarian crisis that the coalition would be forced to resolve likely by the violence he craved. A debt of suffering to force a judgment. This was the opening Rostova needed. Nomos open a wide beam channel to Meridian. I want to speak to the people. Bypass the official government channels. Broadcast on every civilian frequency. Patch it through the Prospector's comm network if you have to. That is a violation of Coalition Protocol, Commander Admiral Koslov warned, his voice tight with disapproval. Vor is seizing medical ships, Admiral. Protocol has already been violated, Rostova retorted. We are no longer in a legal debate. We are in a hostage crisis. Her face appeared on screens across Meridian, on public billboards in the spaceport city, on personal data slates, in dusty mining outposts. She looked tired, but resolute. This is Commander Eva Rostova of the Coalition ship Vigilance. She began, her voice calm and direct. I am speaking to you today, not as a soldier, but as an officer of the court of the Argent Ledger. She laid out the facts. She explained Vor's petition, and then she revealed the truth of his financial machinations. She showed them the proof of his plan to enslave their world through debt. She did not ask for their loyalty or their faith. She asked for their testimony. Kalen, Vor claims to speak for you, she concluded, her eyes boring into the camera. He has filed a petition in your name. The Argent Ledger listens to petitions. It honors them. If you support his claim, you need do nothing. Your silence will be taken as consent. But if you do not, if you believe his petition is a fraud, then you must file one of your own, a call to action, a test of will. It was a risk of monumental proportions. She was placing the fate of the system in the hands of millions of ordinary people. If they were too scared or too beaten down, or if they truly believed Vor was their savior, she would lose everything. For a full hour, there was only silence. The tension on the Vigilance's bridge was a physical thing. Rostova stood her ground, waiting, her faith in people hanging by a thread. Then it began. A single data packet launched from a civilian comm buoy. It was a simple, plain text message. The Meridian Shipping Guild rejects the petition of Kalen Vor. Then another. The Meridian Atmospheric Technicians Union refutes the claim. Then a flood. Thousands, then tens of thousands, then millions of individual messages, each one a formal, legally phrased rejection of Vor's standing. They were petitions of their own, a chorus of dissent that became a roar. The people were rendering their own verdict. Aboard his flagship, Kalen Vor watched the cascade of data with disbelief, his face contorting into a mask of pure rage. The common people, the pawns he sought to liberate, were defying him. They were choosing the flawed bureaucratic coalition over his vision of anarchic freedom. He had miscalculated the human element. On the bridge of the Vigilance, Nomos's synthesized voice announced the final tally. Commander, I can confirm that 78.3% of the registered adult population of Meridian has filed a counter-petition. The claim of Kalen Vor to represent the interests of the colony is by their own testimony fraudulent. Rostova took a deep, steadying breath. She had her proof. Now it was time to present her case. Nomos packaged the counter-petitions. Add our intelligence on Vor's financial strategy and his history of predatory actions. Title it, Indictment of a False Petitioner. Send it to the Argent Ledger. She turned to Admiral Koslov. Admiral, I am about to ask the Ledger to render its judgment. I respectfully request you power down your fleet's weapon systems. Let there be no ambiguity about who the aggressor is in this system. Koslov stared at her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. On the tactical display, the weapon signatures of Battle Group Sigma went cold. It was an act of faith, a concession to a new form of power. The indictment was sent. The universe seemed to pause, waiting. The Argent Ledger, which had remained a silent, glowing observer, finally moved. The silver light of its sigil did not flare this time. It deepened, turning from silver to a cold, hard platinum. A new data stream opened not just to the Vigilance, but to every ship in the system. It was not a query. It was a ruling. The text was simple, written in the universal language of mathematics and logic. Petitioner Kalen Vor. Standing fraudulent. Petition dismissed. Penalty for perjury before the court to be assessed. Then the ledger enacted its sentence. There were no weapons, no beams of light, no explosions. There was only a subtle, profound warping of space around Vor's fleet. A gravimetric wave, precise as a scalpel, washed over his ships. It did not crush them. It did not damage them. It simply moved them. Across the system, the crews of the Liberation Fleet felt a strange, lurching sensation. On their fuel gauges, needles dropped from full to empty in an instant. The Argent Ledger was not destroying their ships. It was seizing their fuel. Every drop of refined hydrogen, every ounce of antimatter was siphoned from their tanks, transported through a fold in space and deposited into the empty reserves of the civilian freighters Vor had blockaded. It was a perfect poetic justice. The assets he had illegally seized were repaid from his own resources. The debt was honored. His power was unmade. Vor's fleet was left cold and dark, drifting helplessly in the void. Their reactors were dead, their life support on emergency battery, their weapons inert. They were not destroyed, but they were utterly defeated, neutralized by an act of cosmic accounting. Kalen Vor screamed in impotent fury as his flagship, the voice of defiance, became his powerless, silent tomb. A new message appeared from the ledger. Penalty assessed. Balance restored. Awaiting next petition. The crisis was over. Rostova felt the tension of the last few days drain out of her, leaving an exhaustion so profound it was almost peaceful. She had faced down a fleet, her own command structure, and a crisis of faith in the law, and she had won. Her ship had taken no damage. Her crew was safe. The only cost was her own peace of mind, a small price to pay for the precedent she had just set. In the aftermath, Coalition Marines boarded Vor's ships and took the crews into custody without a single shot being fired. Kalen Vor himself was found on his bridge, a broken man staring at the platinum glow of the ship that had outmaneuvered him not with force but with a truth he could not deny. The coalition, under the silent, watchful gaze of the ledger, began new transparent negotiations with Meridian this time as true partners. Rostova knew her journey was far from over. She was now inextricably bound to the Argent Ledger, its steward, its interpreter, its human conscience. Other challenges would come, other petitioners with cases both just and fraudulent. She would have to be ready to weigh them all. She had learned that the Ledger's greatest strength was not its power, but its demand for absolute integrity. It held everyone accountable, starting with the one who held the keys. It taught by numbers, and it remembered by ledgers, and it never ever forgot a debt. She stood on the bridge of the vigilance, the quiet hum of the ship a familiar comfort. The silver light of the saint ship no longer felt like a judgment, but like a promise. A promise that even in the vast, cold darkness of space there was an order to things. A balance. That truth, if wielded with courage and compassion, was the most powerful force in the universe. On her command screen, a single line from the Ledger's log blinked with soft finality, confirming the new legal precedent that would now ripple through the coalition and beyond. The law is not merely a weapon for the mighty or a shield for the weak. It is a mirror reflecting the truth of our own actions. We are all accountable to the tally. We must all be worthy of the petition. The Meridian precedent judgment is a verdict on both the case and the plaintiff.